We are back, episode 8 of Second Nature. Aaron, it's good to see you, buddy. We haven't caught up in a couple of weeks. What's going on, bro?
I'm so fired up, man. We're back. I'm back from Europe. We finally get to catch up, and this is basically just us recording our catch up session, I think.
We took last week off, but we published an interview that I had done with Mike Rogie, the editor and owner of the Mountain Gazette, in the feed last week. It was an awesome conversation, though. It was 7 months old. I'm looking forward to receiving edition number 201 of the Mountain Gazette here in the next week or so. In fact, I think I got my tracking notification today. So that beautiful, humongous magazine is on its way to me here in Marin County. Did you have a chance to look up Mountain Gazette or get to know Mike Rogie at all?
I'm still digging through the entire podcast myself, but I remember when you first had that conversation, and I wanted to ask you, was there anything in there that was sort of surprising to you? I mean, to the basic story, right, is that the Mountain Gazette has existed for a long time, and then he kind of came in and brought it back to life and brought it out, right? Was there anything that really surprised you during that discussion?
The coolest part about the Mountain Gazette is the history of the magazine. It was the fringe, edgy outdoor publication before Outside Magazine existed. It's had a tumultuous, volatile history, which is part of its character. And I'll send you a link because it's worth reading about. But people like Hunter Thompson and Edward Abbey and Royal Robbins were writing in the Mountain Gazette at the same time when they were sort of at the peak of their literary powers in, the American literary heritage. And so that alone gives it like just such credibility for, the outdoor publication landscape. But it's been through multiple owners, but Mike, he's clearly a brilliant leader of this new media property. And to me personally, I'm just really jealous of his business model as somebody who operates his own media brand. I just feel like he's really doing it very well, operating with the subscription plus the advertising, but creating like a beautiful product that's worthy of subscription. And I think that's the thing that's most important in media in today's day and age. And the reason it's so worthy of subscription is because it's so different. You can't get the Mountain Gazette content or the Mountain Gazette experience from anything else, which means they lock their customers in, they create evangelists like I've become, and then we don't churn, right? And like you said in the podcast, I mean, last year they were increasing subscriptions, 1,100 new subscribers per month. You can do the math on that. It's a strong business. I'm jealous. He's the man. It's a beautiful product. You got to subscribe.
That's amazing. I mean, it goes a long way to show that when you make something with a ton of intention and a high level of quality, people show up for it. And maybe that's the problem, is that we in the past have churned out too many magazines and you could never keep up and the quality decreased as a result. But when you put the effort in, like they put into this one, it's worth backing. And if you focus in on delivering quality, people show up.
It is fascinating, just the foresight of doubling down on print magazine ownership at a time when everybody was cutting the print side of their media apparatus. It's a total zig when everybody else is zagging, and a beautiful example of contrarian thinking being successful. Anyway, a great conversation.
Amazing.
Shout out to Mountain Gazette. Shout out to Mike Rogie. 7-month-old podcast, but I hope everybody enjoyed it. While we were away, should we talk about your trip to Europe quickly? Should we do a couple of shout outs?
Let's do shout outs, and then we can talk about this Europe trip because we've got plenty to go through today in addition to that.
Okay.
So first of all, the Instagram DMs are absolutely incredible. Like I'm doing my best to keep up with all the responses and everything, but they've been great. We've had some really interesting input and feedback, some ideas for future episodes. So one I want to call out, Rachel Bachman Perkins suggested talking about the nonprofit side of the outdoor industry. So like Protect Our Winters and the Hunnell Foundation, the High Fives Foundation. There's so many amazing groups that are out there in all kinds of different aspects of the outdoor industry. And there's something worth doing a bit of a deep dive there. So I thought that was a really cool suggestion that we got in the DMs. But of course, plenty of other ones in there too. And we've got a lot to work with for sure.
And I have the perfect guest to satisfy this request. My sister-in-law, Aaron, you may not know this, is the executive director of the Honnold Foundation. Emily Teitsworth, the sister of my wife, Harmony, runs the Honnold Foundation. So she would be a perfect guest to bring on Second Nature to satisfy that listener request. And a great idea.
Yeah, that's a great
Thank you,
idea. And
Rachel.
yeah, excellent that we got the inside line to, that's cool.
Hell yeah. And I just wanted to give a shout out to my boy and neighbor and another one of my media inspirations, Mario Freoli, who runs the Morning Shakeout newsletter and podcast, one of the best media minds in the world of running across all different disciplines, road, track, trail, etc. He linked to us in his Morning Shakeout newsletter today, which goes out to thousands of passionate runners around the world, calling us his new favorite podcast. See, come on.
I'll take it. That's
We're
cool.
getting the endorsement of people we respect, which is really all the endorsement we need. So tell me.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, tell me about your trip to Europe, but if you have something you want to say, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I genuinely can appreciate the fact that this is probably one of the first projects I've ever worked on where I don't feel any sort of headwind. Everyone seems really excited about the stuff that you and I are talking about and the way that, we're bringing this stuff up and kind of riffing on it. And it's a really great feeling. Usually you have to fight really hard to just get everything up and running. And here we are 8 episodes in, and well, it's going pretty well.
Yeah. The headwinds are coming. The headwinds are inevitable. Trust me, I've been in the middle of a 1,000,000-mile-an-hour headwind for the last 2 months, as you know. Maybe we can talk about that later, but it does feel good. It does feel good.
One other thing that I just thought about was we had a recommendation also in the DMs about a Second Nature reading list, which I think both you and I could absolutely build out. I'm going to
talk about that in today's episode.
Perfect. Yes. Done deals. So Second Nature reading list. Maybe we just start adding it into the newsletter, as I think I've put it in a few of them already, of some books that we've mentioned in the past. But I think maybe a Second Nature reading list is in order. We'll have to work that out.
Hell yeah. Okay. You were in Europe last week with your eldest son, Tegan.
Yeah.
Cruising around.
First ever trip to Europe, which went off without a hitch. I thought a lot about it. And, there's that saying of like, no one steps in the same river twice. And you can only do first trip to Europe one time. And man, it honestly couldn't have gone any better. To see someone experience travel overseas for the first time is a pretty special thing. And to be there to kind of guide them through and make it somewhat easy. Man, it was so cool. It was so fun to watch. And, I thought a lot about the experience of being in Europe and my experiences being over there. And I was trying so hard to make everything be memorable and meaningful. And I was kind of stressing myself out to get him to like really grasp how life-changing this really was. And about halfway through the trip, I realized that even after my first few trips over to Europe, it didn't really sink in. And I don't think I really understood the impact that those first trips had on my life, my worldview, my perspectives, until like maybe 5 or 10 years later. And it's sort of silly for anyone to think that like, they're going to fully realize the impact of this like life-changing moment immediately. Of course, it's going to take time. So when I got to that point of understanding, then I was able to kind of lean back and just do my best to make as many memorable moments as possible and just have fun with it, as opposed to like ascribing this meaning to every single thing that we did. So I don't know. That's what you do as a dad, right? You want all this stuff to really sink in and mean something all the time. And yeah, I don't know.
Hey, real quick, doubling down on this before we get to the really cool thing that you did while you were in London. I remember when you were on my other podcast the first time, you described the impact that Tegan had on you early in your career. And maybe that would be a fun thing to talk about here on Second Nature, because you're 44. Yeah. How old's Tegan now?
Actually, he turns 22 this month. So we're like at the, I don't know, was that halfway point or whatever?
Have you guys meditated on that together, about the fact that you were his age when he was born?
Yeah, we've definitely talked about it. And this summer we're doing a big trip together across the country. So that's sort of like going to cement it in place. But
So what I was
yeah, it's
getting at though is that I know becoming a father at a young age had a big impact on your career, at least in how you thought about the urgency of building a career in
mhm.
the space that we've worked in now for a long time. Say a few words about that because it's obviously relevant to our show here.
Yeah, I was 22 when I became a father, and that moment was, I was a pro athlete at the time, and I was doing some work, and then, I had to graduate college and get a real job and really focus in on family. And for me to hold on to my dreams of being a pro athlete or being in the bike industry whatsoever, I had to sort of really focus my energy on becoming successful. There was no way to go halfway with it. You had to be successful or you had to just give up on your dream, basically. And so this really motivated me to put all of my effort and to be intentional about how I approached every single thing I did in the industry. And I think it gave me a really sharp business focus from the beginning because I couldn't just do stuff for fun or in exchange for product or anything like that. I had to be successful. I had to build a business. And if I couldn't, then I wasn't going to be able to do anything. And so having the stakes be higher from an earlier age, I think made me focused, sharp, and I had to be successful. Otherwise, it was all going to be over.
You got to grow up at an
Yeah.
accelerated pace compared to your peers.
But then I was out in front of my peers at that point because I had been financially successful. And then I just took that lead and tried to extend it as much as possible over the following 22 years.
So what a great legacy for Tegan, and I know that he's a super proud of his old man there.
I think
So,
so. I
so
think so.
and in that spirit of pride, you took him to a pretty special place there in London to get a gift. Why don't you tell the
Yeah.
audience about that?
Well, look what I have right here. If you're watching the YouTube video, you can see this. This is the YouTube silver play button. This is what they give you when you cross 100,000 subscribers on your YouTube channel. And if you're just listening to the podcast, it's about the size of a laptop. It's pretty large and in charge. And YouTube will gift this to you at 100,000 and 1 million subscribers and then 10 million subscribers. You get these fancy little plaques. And the cool thing about this London trip was that my friend Chris works at YouTube, and his job is dealing with the high level creators, guys that have like millions and millions and millions of people. So if you're familiar with YouTube, you might have heard of the Sidemen. They do actually a big charity soccer match every year. Um, but he works with all these big creators, and he and I have been friends for a long time, and we've been talking every month since I had 300 or 400 subscribers on the channel, just kind of riffing on YouTube stuff and talking about life, the universe, and everything. And we checked in with each other once a month, every month, without missing, I think, a single one for the last 3 or 4 years. And so when I knew I was coming into London, I knew I was going to hit 100,000 subscribers. We kind of worked it out. I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if you were the one to present the plaque instead of normally they just mail it to you or whatever? I was like, I'm going to be in London. That's where your YouTube office is. Wouldn't it be cool if you presented that plaque to me? We could kind of share the moment together. And he was all in. And so when we got to London, we got all set up with my local crew, and then we all went down to the YouTube office. We did a tour, and then we went to the rooftop of YouTube London HQ, overlooking the whole city. It was pretty epic setup. And then they opened up this big leather case, and inside of it was this YouTube play button. And honestly, I was speechless. I mean, I knew it was coming. Obviously, I knew I'd already crossed 100K, but I don't know. There's something about just like when you see like a physical piece in front of you, just commemorating the 4 years of effort that you put in to get to that point. And it was really special. And to have Tegan there and to have some of my other friends there with me and to have Chris there with me, I mean, I couldn't have asked for anything more. Just incredible,
Congratulations, buddy. And I love
Thanks,
how you
man.
coordinated it to have your buddy hand you or present you that silver play button. It reminds me of something we talked about, I think in episode 1 or 2. Or no, it was actually when you were on my podcast last fall when you described like having Rebecca Rush present the Red Bull helmet to Kate Courtney, sort of
Yeah.
like making that moment special in a unique way. Congratulations. I know you came
Thanks.
prepared with a few things that you meditated about on the trip as it relates to this big milestone moment. We've talked about you touching 100,000, but it seems like there's some more things that came to mind.
Yeah, the interesting thing, I got dared to run my first marathon. I don't know if you knew this. I got dared to do it. And I did actually do all the training that I found on the internet. I didn't have a coach like you, like I did during my ultra marathon phase.
Yeah.
My first marathon, I just downloaded something off the internet and trained for like 16 weeks or whatever, and then ran the LA marathon. And when I crossed or stumbled across the finish line in LA, I thought to myself, oh, so that's how much effort it actually takes to run a marathon. Because up until that point, I hadn't done it. That was my first time running 26.2 miles. And I thought a lot about that when I got that 100K silver plaque from YouTube of, wow, that's what it takes to get to 100,000 subscribers. It was just like a marathon. And there's always that fun phrase of like people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in 5. But yeah, it was just really like this poignant moment getting that and being like, oh, so that's how much effort it takes to get 100,000 subscribers, because it's a battle. And I thought about some interesting bits of things I learned along the way that might be relevant. And I know we kind of talked about this a little bit when I hit 100K, but for a lot of people out there who are considering their own YouTube channels, or maybe they're the company they work for is thinking about diving more into the content side of things, I think this will be pretty relevant. So it's not just about me or whatever else. I think this applies to anybody having a discussion about creating content for their channels. So I'll give you 5 lessons that I got. Evergreen content over everything. Make content that will be useful for the longest amount of time. So YouTube is the number 2 search engine in the world. You can make stuff now that answers a question, that will answer the question right now, that will still be relevant a decade from now, and it will continue to be useful to both you and the viewer. Evergreen content is absolutely where it's at. And my channel's obviously loaded with that kind of stuff. The way that I think about putting videos on YouTube is that every single video is an employee, and the employee's job is to bring people back to my channel, subscribers, viewers, whatever. Now, not every employee is equal, right? Some employees are better than others, and that's okay. Just know that every single time you make a video, it has a job, and its job is to bring more people back to your channel. And again, some are better than others, but they're all employees. Long-term consistency over short-term intensity. I think I said this one before, but I've seen so many athletes and brands just give up on their YouTube strategy after like 5 videos. And, you're just not going to get any real data until probably 6 months to a year in to signal that things are going the right way. Look at the Second Nature YouTube channel. I mean, we've posted, this will be the 8th video. They're not cranking crazy videos, but I'm really confident that in a year, there's going to be a pretty decent sized community that's tuning into every single one of those, and it's only going to grow. And as long as you don't stop posting videos, you basically can't lose. It only grows as long as you continue to put effort into it. Related to that, don't judge your results in the short term. It's a long-term game. So if I think back to some of the earliest videos I did, they did 30 views in like a day or the first week or whatever. If I go back 4 years later to look at those same videos, they now have like 30,000 views. So if I had judged them in the short term, I would have been like, oh, automatic flop. But when you add in that time element, you actually see like, oh, actually, this is a really great video, and it was evergreen, so it was useful for a long period of time. but you really get the chance to see like, yeah, my production skills may not have been as good and I can get to 33,000 a lot faster, but it still was filled with relevant, useful information that a lot of people seem to get a lot of value out of. And it also makes me wonder, what are my videos now going to look like in, 3 or 4 years? Interesting to think about what that might be. The last piece of advice I have is to listen to your audience and find as many possible ways to connect with them. So over the last 4 years, I had a Discord channel where I connected with my community on a regular basis. I had a Twitch live stream for a while, which is actually really useful for me as I was teaching people stuff because I could get immediate feedback from them. We've got the newsletter. In person at events was probably the biggest inflection point for me, was going to Sea Otter last year and having people tell me that they're doing this, practicing this stuff on a mountain bike, made me have this light bulb moment of like, wait, I should do more mountain bike specific stuff. And obviously that unlocked a ton of growth for me professionally and on the channel.
Mhm.
So listening to your audience in as many different places and reaching out and creating places for them to congregate outside of YouTube, also super, super valuable. That's my top 5.
Brilliant, dude. When are we starting a YouTube consultancy for athletes and creators and brands through Second Nature? Or are you just going to do it independent? You should just do it.
I'm either way, whatever anybody needs, hit us
If you're
up.
listening and you need help with your YouTube strategy, secondnature.media on Instagram. Holler at your boy Lutzi and he'll get you dialed up.
I got you.
Anything else from your trip to Europe before we go to my reading list?
I am ready for your reading list. That was a lot on that trip. It was amazing. I can't wait to go back. Thank you to everybody overseas that made it such an epic trip. Man, there's really nothing like traveling, is there?
Nothing like it. I can't wait to be doing it with my son when he's 22 years old. I only got 20 more years to wait though, bro. I'll be in my mid 50s at that point. So cool, man. All right. So you'll remember in episode 6, we closed by me shamefully admitting that I'd sort of given up on reading in the last couple of months. You and I frequently talk about the books that we're reading. We frequently text each other book recommendations. And I revealed to you that I had lost my consistency with the reading habit. Well, I'm happy to say, Aaron, that last week I forced myself to take some time off work and I opened a freaking book again.
Nice.
And I opened the book that I mentioned on the podcast. It is called Open by Andre Agassi. It's a fantastic book. I'm about halfway through it. And I want to read a quick excerpt here on the podcast because I think it's really relevant to things that you and I talk about all the time. So I'm going to read it and ask you to react to it. And you'll understand why this is really relevant and why it touched me in a special way at the right moment. So the book starts, it's funny. This is actually an excerpt from the first page of the book. Okay. And the first chapter is titled The End, which is kind of an ironic, funny way to start a book, to call it The End. But what it is a description of himself waking up the morning of one of his final matches before the US Open. And he basically, I'll just read this quick excerpt here and I'll ask you to respond to it. He says, I'm a young man, relatively speaking, 36, but I wake as if I'm 96. After 3 decades of sprinting, stopping on a dime, jumping high, and landing hard, my body no longer feels like my body, especially in the morning. Consequently, my mind doesn't feel like my mind. Upon opening my eyes, I'm a stranger to myself, and while again, this isn't new, in the mornings it's more pronounced. I run quickly through the basic facts. My name is Andre Agassi. My wife's name is Stephanie Graff. We have 2 children, a son and daughter, 5 and 3. We live in Las Vegas, Nevada, but currently reside in a suite at the Four Seasons Hotel in New York City because I'm playing in the 2006 US Open, my last US Open. In fact, my last tournament ever. I play tennis for a living, even though I hate tennis. I hate it with a dark and secret passion and always have. As this last piece of identity falls into place, I slide to my knees and in a whisper, I say, please let this be over. Then I'm not ready for this to be over. That's how he starts his book, Aaron. And
I'm in. I'm so in.
As he says, he's 36 at this time, waking up before one of his final matches at the US Open. Your boy's 38. His body doesn't feel like his body. And I don't know, I felt like this was maybe a good way to prompt a discussion about retirement and how to navigate that moment well for athletes. It's something you and I have talked about also. And, you know, the options available to athletes. I mean, the thing that is most poignant to me in that passage is the way it ends. Please let this be over. And also, I'm not ready for this to be over. Because, like, all pro athletes will understand just how grueling and painful and arduous and filled with suffering it is to be a pro athlete, but also just how incredible and amazing it is to just direct your life towards one single thing and know, like, 6 weeks from now, I am going to be in the box pushing myself over a mountain pass in the middle of the night, and nobody will be there but me and my own willpower and my own, you know, inborn talent, strength, perseverance. And it's an addicting, beautiful life. But also, it's like, okay, I'm ready for this to be over, but please don't let this ever be over. With that being said, Aaron, what are your top line thoughts about athlete retirement and Andre's passage here?
First of all, when it comes to ultra running, I don't think I've ever run a race where I haven't questioned all of my life decisions. So, no, I think, the interesting thing is that tennis was his identity for so long. And especially back then, there wasn't as clear of a path. Like, what were his options actually after completing that were to probably, commentate other events as like a guest, commentator, or training other people, like, teaching, being a guest
Coaching, yeah.
coach, right? There was no Instagram, influence there. There was no, probably not chance of starting a company and having access to all of the quick and easy things that you could do. There's not as many options as there are today. And also, did he think about what retirement was going to look like? What was he envisioning as that transition? Because what I've seen a lot of times is that athletes are not even thinking about the transition. It just comes up like a brick wall and they're not ready to move on. I've unfortunately been in the room many, many times with Red Bull athletes that were, in the process of becoming graduated, is what we called them. So that meant that, like, hey, we're not going to resign. Here's whatever. And you try to do that as gently as you possibly can. And for about 50% of those athletes, you could tell that, like, they didn't see it coming somehow. And that's a really frustrating thing for all involved, because at a certain point, it is time, and it's time to move on to the next thing, and to also make way for the next batch of athletes that are coming through, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that the athletes who did the best in that situation were the ones who had a really clear path forward. Because I think that athletes have so much value when they're in their peak competitive years, but they also have so much value post competing. And whether or not they identify, and specifically to you, whether or not you identify as an athlete doesn't really actually matter in the end, because you've built so much credibility over your career and so much trust, goodwill. People want to know what you think about stuff, whether it's gear recommendations, the race itself, the racers. Like, people are really genuinely interested in what your thoughts are, because you've been in the trenches as a pro athlete for so long. You have a credibility that's going to last for a really long time. And what you do with that and how you go about that is the thing that's the most important. But, look, you built Free Trail, which is super, super credible. It's built off of the credibility that you gained as an athlete, but then you've been putting in the work for many, many years to build this thing out. So you probably have one of the best, I guess, quote unquote, retirement plans of any athlete I've seen, because you have opportunities built into all this stuff where you can go commentate at events. You can advise brands on strategy with athletes, with products, with, events, with all these different things. You can help in so many ways, and you're going to be welcomed through the door in a way that people without your pedigree won't be. And so you still have such a huge leg up, whether or not you ever pin a bib on ever again. It kind of doesn't matter. Like, there's a certain point. I was actually talking to somebody who wasn't an athlete, but they had been working at a brand for a long time, and they were trying to decide if they should move on to the next brand. And the advice that I gave them was, do you feel like you are going to add anything more to your story if you stay with this brand? Or will moving to the next job be the next step of that story? Like, you don't need to stay here any longer
Yeah.
than to be able to say, like, I did this thing and it was successful. Then it's time to move on to the next thing. And so in that context, I would tell you, you've established the fact that you are one of the best ultra runners in the world. And that's an undisputable fact. You've won mega events, you've broken course records, you've done all the big stuff. And so what more do you need to add to that story that's going to get you any further than you already are?
So I think what's most interesting to me, though, yes, granted, there are a lot more opportunities for athletes to transition more successfully given things like social media, YouTube, podcasts, etc., media creation, coaching, etc. But the value in like drawing the line in the sand is sort of an interesting thing to contemplate. And just off the top of my head, I think there's maybe two examples that we could just riff on together. One being Tim Johnson, our mutual friend, who was a pioneering Red Bull athlete, cyclocross champion, who never officially announced his retirement and sort of slowly transitioned to being more of like an ambassador for the sport and a thought leader who was enlisted by a bunch of different governing bodies and brands to advise on their strategy and interface with athletes. But then there's like Paul Rabel, who is another Red Bull athlete who has transitioned to retirement elegantly also, but he was one of the best lacrosse players of all time and started the professional lacrosse league. That it's called the Premier Lacrosse League, but it's sort of like the premium or the just like the professional outdoor league now. And there's an interesting story there. Maybe we can talk about on a future podcast. But he did sort of draw that line in the sand after trying to be sort of a co-commissioner of the league and competing at the same time to step away and say, no, I'm done. Obviously the two sports are different. Cycling, you can be more of an ambassador, where lacrosse, you can't just like, stroll back onto the field. I guess you could ride the bench or whatever, but you're not providing any value to the team, and you certainly wouldn't be on the field performing against the best in the world. So that's the thing that I struggle with. Is I'm actually decently fit right now, Aaron. I shouldn't make this sound like I'm on the precipice of retirement. In fact, I'm going to Europe in a couple of weeks to run 100K in Austria.
Nice.
But it's just one of those things that I think about a lot, is like, when do I know it's time, and when do you determine, like, or do you sort of let it slowly become a reality rather than confronted what's obvious.
I don't think you should ever shut the door entirely on it. I mean, look at me. I'm 44 years old and I'm turning pro in mountain biking. So like, I mean, sure, I'm not going to win a World Cup anytime soon, but all intents and purposes, I'm a professional. I'm getting paid money to ride bicycles now at 44. So, I just I don't really think there's, like, what's the definition now of an athlete? It's not just somebody who goes out, a professional athlete, let's say. It's not just somebody who only races. There's so many
But
other
there's a
ways.
symbolic element of saying like, okay, I'm done trying to kick ass, And to me, feels like it would relieve sort of more of an emotional burden more than anything, of just like sort of admitting to yourself, like, okay, this is the next chapter now, even if you're still just as committed to the sport that you've made your living in, it's going to be in a different way, but at least making that explicit, I think there may be some value in it, but I don't know. It's just something that I think about a lot, that I'm struggling with, and that Andre Agassi's book uh, made me think would be fun to talk about with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I mean, let's just be candid, like you've got a 2-year-old, you're building this media empire, you're stuck on podcasts with me all the time now. You got a lot on your plate. And when things get up and running with everything that you're working on, when roads is a little bit bigger, do you feel like, oh, maybe I'm going to have more free time? I mean, there are still ultra runners a decade older than you that are crushing
Yeah.
when they want to. And so, um, I get the idea of like setting a chapter marker here in your journey, but I also feel like as a seasoned dad, I know that there are peaks and valleys to parenthood, and there may be, a window that comes up in a couple years where you're like, you know what? I've got Free Trail fully up and running. Second Nature is crushing. Roads is up and running around. I think it's time. Like I'm going to dedicate, 2028 to just like stomping it out in these big events and whatever. Who knows,
All right. So
why would
still
you
some
close the
hope.
door on that?
One of the things that it also conjured is the relationship, or the just like cliche comparison between business and sport. Like, business is sport. It is
Mhm.
the best and hardest sport. And even now, in the early days of Free Trail, we're about 3 years into building our business. I still have those things of like, please let this be over, but also like, I'm not ready for this to be over. So I think that's a a universal human experience, or something that is unique to the human condition, where when you're really pursuing something with everything you've got, you end up coming to those points of, please let this be over, but also like, I'm not done yet.
I was thinking about this earlier today because we have this line that goes something like, "Be careful what you're good at." And one thing that you're great at is commentating a 100-mile race. Like I can't think of anything more exhausting than being on point for God knows how long. That's a long time to be on the mic and being as sharp as you are with all the facts and all the input. And man, I just like that's got to be gnarlier than running the 100 miles.
It's a good job. It's a good job. Anyway, fun to just like kind of riff on that stuff. I think, this applies in any aspect of life. It's not just to being a pro athlete, like everybody goes through seasons in their careers, in their relationships, in their lives, having kids, growing older. And, we constantly have to redefine who we are, and also like find peace in who we are. And that, from being a pro athlete for a long time, that is maybe the hardest lesson that you have to learn, is like being at peace with seeing your body change, and seeing your motivation change, and knowing that finite nature of what you're doing. But then what a gift to be able to grab a blank canvas and start anew in a totally different way. So anyway,
Absolutely.
where do we
Yeah.
want to go next? We got a cool job of the week. We could talk about that Donner Summit at Sugar Bowl GoPro event, sort of nurturing the next generation of pro athletes. Should we do the job of the week here quickly?
Let's do job of the week. Yeah.
Okay, sweet. All right, so just to tee this up, On Running is looking for a new director of product strategy for performance outdoor. Seems like a sick job. I got a couple of notes here. Do you want to get us started, or should I?
I just think On is crushing it. I mean, we are sort of like certified fanboys over here. I don't know. Just the way that they're approaching everything is so fun and exciting to just see this brand executing at such a high level and pulling in talent from all over the place. It's no wonder people are leaving some of these bigger, more established brands to go work at places like On. You look at the way that they organize all this stuff. I actually have a good friend who just left Nike to work for On as well, and seems to be having a pretty good time with it. So it's just so cool to see this actually develop in real time in front of us. We're paying attention to On developing their footprint, for lack of sorry. I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's
Uh,
good. I got it. Good dad joke.
but it's really cool to see this and to see them develop this stuff out, to see them have the wins that they've been having already, both competitively and with product and business and all that stuff. But this seems like such a home run when it comes to job. Director of Product Strategy for Performance Outdoor. You would have a field day in this kind of role, I
Yeah,
think.
it's awesome. So I have a couple notes here really quick. I'm just sort of looking for On Running's revenue numbers and growth over time. Maybe you could look that up real quick.
Mhm.
So I just pulled some things from the job description that I think are cool and worth chatting about. So from the job description, it says, as the director of product strategy outdoor, you will be spearheading On's product strategy for the outdoor footwear space. You will be the visionary and architect behind developing this huge growth area further with a high performing team of product and franchise managers, and be responsible for captivating our consumer and communities from trail to street. You know what this screams to me, Aaron?
Hmm.
Trail running, explosion everywhere.
Trail running will save the world.
Trail running will save the world, as we like to say. On Running doesn't want to miss this wave. They know that they're going up against basically every brand in both the performance and the outdoor space, and they don't want to give an inch, and they want to be leaders on this product innovation strategy, specifically in footwear. I have another thought here, Aaron, and that is the idea of Gorp Core, which we haven't ever talked about on the show. You know what it is? You know what it means?
I had to Google this last week.
Yeah. Okay. So for our listeners, Gorp Core is basically when people wear product that is designed for outdoor sport recreation in a more lifestyle context. So if you're wearing a highly technical piece of Arc'teryx outerwear to the movies one night or out to dinner for a fashion statement, that would be considered Gorp Core. There's a great example of this, Aaron, that I think On Running is probably used in many of their internal pitch decks, and that is the Solomon XT shoe. Do you know anything about the Solomon XT?
Fill me in.
Okay, so this shoe was on Kilian Jornet's feet when he won the Ultra Trail de Mont Blanc in 2008. It won the GQ Sneaker of the Year in 2019. So you see how something that was designed for outdoor mountain performance translates into a fashion or lifestyle context. This has been something that has transformed Solomon's business. I doubt that they split these segments up when they do their quarterly reports, but I know that they have what they call the sports style segment of their business. Famously, Rihanna was wearing a sort of custom pair Solomon Speed Cross shoes on stage during the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. And you can only imagine how much revenue that drives. So, a core outdoor brand like Solomon finding a consumer market, admittedly a much bigger total addressable market in just like, everyday lifestyle, and, just marketing that consumer a Gorp Core type product is, I think, where On Running is trying to go here. Having a product that can potentially win a race like UTMB, but is equally appealing to somebody who just wants to look cool when they walk around New York City or something.
That's really interesting. There was actually a whole division at Red Bull that was the culture marketing team. And then they had this third party group that would seed cans of Red Bull to like the Beyoncés and Britney Spears and stuff like that. And if Rihanna's wearing custom Solomon shoes, you have to wonder, do they have a division like that that's just seeding high level talent that has those kind of culture based relationships, not sport based relationships? That was always an interesting element to Red Bull when they would try to do the culture marketing stuff, and it's still a huge element that they're still leaning into. But yeah, doing like a custom collab with Rihanna or whoever else, I mean, that's a full-time job, just making contact with those people, getting them the right shoes, doing something special for them. I mean, it's a really high touch and difficult thing to lock in, but when it works, it goes big. Hey, just looking at On Running's numbers over here too, just related to that. They had a net sales of $2 billion last year, which was a 55% increase from the previous year. So that's mega growth. Their gross profit margin is 59.6%. And looking at their plan for this year, it looks like they're trying to grow 30% from there and trying to get their gross profit margin up to 60%. So they're on a rocket ship, as we kind of expected that they would be. But wow, like 55% and then another 30% after that. I mean, they're going for it. And obviously, it's being driven by trail running.
Yeah. You do see the product around a lot. I don't know if you notice it in Portland, but you almost
Definitely.
only see it in a lifestyle context. At least that's where I notice it. Like very few people that I go out on group runs with are wearing On Running trail shoes, but you see tons of people out at the park or out at brunch wearing shoes that everybody characterizes being super comfortable. I've actually never worn a pair of On shoes. I don't know if you have any opinion on the product, but well, I was actually talking to a guy who I really admire who's worked in this. There you go. I was talking to a guy who I really admire who's worked in the space for a long time, including both at Nike and the North Face. And he said that on the apparel side, he thought that Under Armour was making like some of the nicest, cleanest designed apparel that he's seen in the performance space. And I tend to agree with him. And of course, I come from the outdoor world and from the trail space. But I actually put up a post at UTMB last year because, of course, when I go to UTMB, like all I'm doing is like looking at the brands and the cool products and what are the athlete kits that are all specially made for the team.
Time out for fun. Did you say Under Armour or did you mean On
On
Running?
Running, excuse me.
Oh, okay. All right.
Excuse me.
Sorry. I'm
Yeah.
just making sure because that was okay.
Sorry, thank you. But so to clarify, On Running, in my friend's opinion, is making beautiful apparel. And, obviously this is a footwear focused role. But my point was when we were at UTMB last year, I put up a funny post ranking On Running as number one for like the coolest head to toe kit for their athletes. And my criteria was you had to make all three of the main components: apparel, footwear, and a trail running pack to carry the compulsory equipment. So I compared all the different brands, and my subjective but very correct opinion was that On Running ranked number one for me. So I just think it's a cool brand. It's got a clean logo, clean design. They do really, I think, well with their colorways that they use, and the color palettes that they have. And anyway, just a brand that's on fire right now, and a really cool job opening up in this space.
Yeah, you could have an absolute field day in that job. That's for sure. I
Sweet.
think what a cool thing too that you actually can have input, drive direction, make stuff happen that you actually sort of own in a way, where when you get to a bigger company like Nike or Adidas, there's, it's you're just dealing with the legacy of the decisions that have been made, and you kind of have to follow through, or there's some agency that's got their hands around it and you're just kind of like signing off on stuff. I feel, and this is just my opinion, but it just feels to me like working in a place like On or any other of these, kind of startup, they're not a startup, but younger brands, it just seems like you can actually have a bit more of an impact, and you can drive what's actually going to happen and where they're going to get involved and what they're going to do. I could be totally wrong, but it does seem from the outside like you can actually still have an impact on the brand, which is, I think, what we all want. We all want to feel like the work that we're doing is actually relevant and impactful, not just like being a tiny cog in a giant machine.
Heck yeah. So pretty cool. If you have other cool jobs in the space that you want Aaron and I to riff on, drop them in the DMs, secondnature.media on Instagram. But that was another cool one that came up. Maybe we'll introduce a segment where we touch base or update people on some cool jobs that are available in the industry. Should we wind down with BPC now, or is there anything else you want to talk about?
We can definitely talk about that. One topic I wanted to kind of touch on before we go to BPC. Someone else, Jason Caligari, sent me something in our DMs about Lachlan Morton. So we talked about him in a previous episode. He did the alt tour where he rode the Tour de France faster than the actual race itself. And then he did another, I think the Tour Divide, where you go like north to south through America. And he was in Roller Magazine talking about, he was a road cyclist, obviously, and he went into gravel cycling. And gravel cycling, when it first came out, was so accessible for everyone, and it was so fun and exciting, and just pretty low intensity, really, overall. Like it wasn't heavily competitive, I guess. And anybody could get into it. It was basically just like the equivalent of riding dirt roads. And over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of road teams getting into gravel cycling, and just a lot more pressure being put onto the entire sport itself, to the point where it doesn't appear as accessible as it once was. Or to someone who wants to get into it, it's not as easy as just run what you brung and you'll have a good time. It's, well, what are you doing for nutrition? What gear do you have? What this is, this. And we talked a little bit about accessibility when it comes to, skiing in the previous few episodes, of how much effort it took, and how we kind of overcomplicate everything that we do. For example, trail running should be as simple as strapping on a pair of shoes and going running down the trail. Gravel cycling, kind of the same thing. Ride your bike on dirt roads. But we have this propensity to, well, what are you doing for nutrition? Do you have the right gear on? Are you wearing the right stuff? Do you look cool?
What's your arrow
And
strategy?
right, right. It's just this nature of overcomplicating everything. And you made a comment in a previous episode where you were talking about this idea of, if your sort of brand is trail running will save the world, how do we embody that throughout everything we do? And I have this sense that you want to make it as accessible as possible to everyone that's coming in the door, and make them feel welcome. And I don't have the answer for any of the stuff. In fact, you sent me an article from the Altera CEO speaking on how they deal with people being so upset that the resorts are overrun. And I wasn't really that satisfied with his answer, because he was like, well, it's just really expensive to run all the lifts and keep the mountain open. And while that's true, I just didn't sit right with me. It's like, how do we make this stuff accessible? And they were like, we're trying to not make it accessible by raising the prices on this, so that not everybody buys this thing. And
But
it's
also,
just,
like, the Icon Pass and the Epic Pass have also almost made it too accessible, right? Like,
yeah,
there is
yeah,
the balance of, like, well, if the mountain is super crowded, is it not accessible, or is it too accessible?
yeah. It's and to be fair to the Altera CEO, one of the things he said was like, yeah, we raised prices on this stuff, but we also put that money back into the resorts to open up more terrain to be, available for skiers and snowboarders. We didn't just, sell more passes and not do anything. They did add chairlifts, they did add terrain pods and stuff like that. But I don't know, this idea of accessibility and outdoor, there's so much to talk about here. And what is the best way forward? How do you make this a welcoming space to everybody, and make room for all the new people that are getting into it? I think that's something that we collectively need to come to a conclusion on.
Lachlan is such a great case study of what we talked about with the Agassi model, isn't he? I mean, we've
Mhm.
mentioned Ricky Gates now in almost every episode we've done, but Lachlan is sort of like the cycling Ricky Gates, where he's become more of an artist and a storyteller than a high performance athlete, even though he's a fantastic athlete. People
Mhm.
follow him and love him because of that spirit and because of the values that he brings to the sport. And it is similar in trail running now, as things have gotten more professionalized and a lot more competitive, where optimization has taken over for at least the top tier of professionals, where they're counting their carbs, and they've got the sports psychologist, they've got the strength coach, they got the regular coach. And it's inspiring, and it's led to this total transcendence and rewriting of all record books in the last few years. But there's still that special spirit of just strapping on a pair of shoes and heading out the door and enjoying some time in nature. And there always will be. And it's similar in cycling. It's just a matter of how you enjoy it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to, right? Having fun doing the thing that you're doing, and the people that can challenge the status quo and show a more fun way to approach the sport. and how to get involved in a different way than the norms. It kind of goes into that anti-brand thing that we are talking about. How do they challenge the existing thought process, and how could kind of inspire people to take a different approach to the sport and their way of engaging with the sport. I think that's I want to see more. I want more Ricky Gates. I want more Lachlan Mortons. I want more people to inspire outdoor participants to look at their sports through a different lens.
You don't have to count as many carbs when you're retired, Aaron. Let's close it down with brand product content, BPC. Do you want to go first or should I?
I'll go first. Mine's related to my European trip. So this isn't necessarily an outdoor thing, but actually worked out pretty well for me. I got 10 miles done in one of the days on this trip. Anyway, this app I just found out about a year ago. It's called CityMapper. So imagine Google Maps where you want to get from point A to point B, but in a city like London, Paris, Amsterdam, wherever, San Francisco even. And you put your point A, point B, like start, finish. And what CityMapper does, it will tell you all the different ways you can get from point A to point B, and specific to places that have a lot of different transportation options. So in London, you've got the tube, you've got the Metropolitan. In Paris, you've got all these different ways to go. And in the past, you would have been looking at timetables and does the green line connect to the blue line and whatever. This app will tell you, okay, you get on this one going in this direction, and then you get off that one at this stop, and then you transfer over to this one, and you do that, and it will give you the full itinerary. And it works offline because most of the subways and transit stations are underground. It will work offline and helps you get from point A to point B in the most efficient and direct manner. And that took away so much of my anxiety traveling through Europe, just to know, like, oh, I just take the M52 and then I get off at that stop, and all the signs lined up, and it did not steer me wrong once. So if you're ever in Europe or really anywhere traveling in a city that you're not familiar with, CityMapper, it's totally free. Thank me later.
How is it totally free? I mean, are they running advertisements on it?
I don't know. I'm not really
Are
sure,
the
but
tourist attractions paying to be listed in the app?
I don't think so, but man, is it worth it? And it's a thing that needs to exist, and it's so useful. And I don't know about you, but I get like mega travel anxiety, and this thing just saved me so much anxiety on my trip, because I just put my start finish in, and it gave me like, well, if you want to take an Uber, it's this. If you want to take the subway, it's this. And in a lot of cases, the subway is actually faster moving through these cities. So, and it costs like 10% of the price. So
they didn't have CityMapper in your first trip to Europe.
No,
it's too easy for the kids these days, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
All right, I've got a piece of content that points to a brand. I listened to an episode from the Golfer's Journal podcast. I'm not a golfer, but the Golfer's Journal is sort of like the Mountain Gazette for golf, right? It's a beautiful print first magazine, but they do some digital stuff, including this podcast. This episode was from March, I think. It was with a guy named Stephen Malbon. You probably don't know this guy, but he's the founder of a brand called Malbon Golf. Look it up. Malbon Golf. I'm super inspired by this brand. I was only introduced to them a few months ago and followed them on Instagram, and have just really like fallen down the rabbit hole about what they do in their strategy in their sport and in their community. And basically they're bringing like a coolness to golf. It's almost like streetwear meets the country club. And I think this is my hypothesis, is that these are sort of like the futures of brands in each sporting vertical. And that, if On Running is the next Nike, like what's the Malbon Golf of running right now that's like going after, Titleist and Nike and now Sunday Red, Tiger's new brand, right? Like, I just think that this is, with as sports go niche, as media goes niche, and things are like an inch wide and 100 miles deep, every sport is going to have its like hardcore brand, and Malbon is that for golf. And as you know, Aaron, that's my dream to do in trail running. So that's my my BPC. I'll link to it in the show notes of today's episode. But the Golfers Journal podcast with Stephen Malbin. Check out Malbin Golf. Follow him on Instagram. And the cool thing is, if you listen to this podcast, he started the brand as just an Instagram account where he was just curating cool photos of like old time golfers, and it blew up. And his wife convinced him. He worked in the ad agency, like he had his own ad agency at the time. They live in LA. And she was like, well, why don't you just start like a little retail pro shop where you sell golf stuff and you can just do your ad agency business out the back? And they did. And the shop blew up. And then it was like, okay, well, this needs to be its own brand.
That's so cool.
And you see, if you look at their Instagram, I'll let you react here in a sec. Sorry, I cut you off. But all the big brands want to do collabs with them because they represent the youth, the cool, the culture, the vibe, the next gen of golf. So
yeah, I'm seeing New Balance. I see a Adidas collab in here, Jimmy Choo. There's another brand. Actually, this is like a big thing that's happening in golf. I know we're more of the outdoor guys, but I've been sort of paying attention to golf recently. Obviously, Jordan, our buddy, but also one of my other friends is now the VP at this company called Bad Birdie, which is the same thing. It's like golf wear for guys in their 30s and 40s that are getting into it because there's this big wave of people that are now coming into golf. And I don't know if golf was ready for that necessarily, but they need to have stuff to meet the demand of sort of the new wave of people joining the sport. Cause yeah, they don't want to wear all the tired stuff that's been around forever. And,
I mean, that's what happened with Rafa too, like all the old cycling apparel was like just gross. It wasn't aspirational. It didn't speak to like the culture and the spirit of the sport. And Rafa came with a nicer product, did a bunch of storytelling around it, blew up. And now there's a bunch of sort of newer disruptor brands in cycling. This is that same playbook here in golf. The same thing is going to happen in running. There's already brands like Tracksmith and Bandit that are doing it to a certain degree, but nothing that exists in trail running that does it, in my opinion, in the perfect way. Lutzi, maybe there's an opportunity there. If I weren't so overemployed and so burnt out all the time, maybe I would take action against it.
Call it a retirement project. I was worried that you were going to tell me you're going to pick up golf. I don't know how to deal with that.
Yeah, walking off into the sunset with a 5-iron, frosty beer, call it a day.
Sounds all right.
Well, buddy, it's great to catch up. I'm glad you had a great trip.
It's good to be home. Jet lag is wearing off. I'm feeling right. Everything is right within the world. So time to get back on it. And yeah, I'm fired up.
Hell yeah. All right. So to our listeners, remember, go follow us on Instagram at secondnature.media. Go follow us or subscribe to our newsletter at secondnature.media. We'll be back again next week with more fun banter. For Aaron Lutzi, I'm Debo. Peace out.